Hello everyone, my name is George Bina and I will be your host today. Thank you for attending our webinar. We have a record number of registrations, more than 230 people registered to attend this session, which shows a great interest on this topic. XML authoring tools have evolved a lot in the last years, and I believe it is possible now to create user-friendly interfaces to allow non-technical people to author XML documents, user interfaces that are easier to use than word processing applications. To make this possible, we added, in addition to the visual editing support, also support for form controls and inline actions. My colleague Alex is one of our senior developers, and he actively worked on this form-based and inline action support. So I invited him to present this functionality so you can get an idea of what it is possible and how such interfaces can be created. Markus Wiedenmeyer is one of our users that surprised me first by creating a data extension to annotate images in data documents through SVG. I presented that at XML Prague because Markus was not able to attend that in our users meetup. And now he took advantage of these form controls to create XML authoring interfaces usable by not technical people. So I invited also Markus to share with us, to show his work, because what he did matches exactly the subject we discussed today. So the agenda is this short introduction, followed by the actual presentation, XML authoring for everyone. At the end, we will have a question and answer session, and I will go through the list of upcoming events, other webinars we scheduled, and the conferences where you can meet with us. If you have questions during the webinar, please post them either through Twitter using the Oxygen XML hashtag, or in the GoToWebinar interface, you have this questions chat window, or in case this questions panel. In the case when we have this question chat, please make sure you check send questions to staff, because we have a number of people from our team that will answer your questions during the webinar. We will then go through these questions. At the end, I will put this question, and Alex, me, and Markus can respond to them. So that being said, I will pass control to my colleague Alex.
Hello everybody, my name is Alex, and together we're going to take a look at how even less technical people can find an XML editing experience as being a both pleasant and productive one. This presentation is structured into two separate parts. First, we'll see things from a user's perspective, and then we're going to tackle the more technical aspects needed to add the same level of support to any custom XML vocabulary. That being said, for the user perspective, I have prepared a couple of examples. The first one is a travel guide which presents the Greek island of Santorini. Actually, this is one of the sample files that comes with Oxygen. So first, let's switch to author mode, and we can do that from the bottom of the page. Click the author button. For those of you that are not yet familiar with Oxygen's author mode, just a short introduction. The author mode is intended to help the user focus on the XML semantics, while Oxygen automatically handles the formatting and the layout. And for this formatting and layout, Oxygen uses CSS rules. So if you want your own XML document to look like this, you just have to write a couple of CSS rules and that's it. Of course, there's more to the um, author mode than just the CSS part, but that's just what we need to know right now to carry on with our presentation. So it looks a lot better now, and it's easier to focus on the content and to edit, but there's still a couple of burdens that we're going to identify together. First, let's take this information element at the top of the document. It looks empty, but it actually has a couple of important attributes, and each time I want to edit these attributes, I have to go to the attributes panel here on the right side of the editor and edit them. And it's a bit disruptive, this going back and forth between the attributes panel and the main editing area. So in my opinion, it would be a lot better if I uh, could edit these attributes right here in the main editing area. As we move down, we notice the same problem with the plane schedule and the ferry schedule. Um, let's take the point of interest. Each point of interest has a photo associated with it, which is also given by an attribute. And in my opinion, it would be better if I could just browse for this photo, ideally again right here in the main editing area. One more thing I want to show you is this how to get there element. It has a reachable by attribute, which is a multiple value. So if I want to uh, edit this attribute, I have to manually compose the value, and I believe it would be better if I could have, let's say, a couple of checkboxes and just check the items that apply in this case. Now that you've seen the problems, I'm gonna change the CSS file that Oxygen uses to render this document. And to do that, I'll have to go on the toolbar on this Styles button, and from the small pop-up, I'll select the Form Controls CSS. Now let's see what happened. First, the information element. As you can see, I am now able to edit its attributes right here in the main editing area. I have a text field for the population, another text field for the area. The currency is being edited using a combo box, and as I select a different entry, the document is automatically updated, as you can see in the attributes panel. As we move down, we notice these same kind of combo boxes being used for the weather and temperature table, but this time we have editable combo boxes. And also a nice feature, as you hover uh, the mouse over such a form control, it gets highlighted to indicate possible user interaction that can happen here. The plane schedule also uses editable combo boxes and text fields. For the ferry schedule, we have a different type of combo of form control. It looks like a label, but when I click it, it presents a pop-up list, and I can just select an entry from it. This text field over here has content completion capabilities to help me compose the value much faster. To demonstrate how easy it is to work with these form controls, I'm gonna add a new point of interest, And the faster way to do that is to use these inline actions, which are also form controls. So I'll just click add, and a new point of interest was inserted. Let's talk about the capital of the island, the city of Fira. Like I said, the capital. Now we need a photo for to associate with this point of interest, and we can just use this browse form control that has appeared over here. So I'll just click browse, and I'll select the needed photo. And as you can see, the document was automatically updated. Next, we're just gonna select the type. It's a town, and it's an expensive town, so we'll set the costs. And it's reachable by any means of transportation, so we're just gonna click all these checkboxes, and just look how easy it was to compose this reachable by attribute with a multiple value. It's one more thing I want to set into my point of interest, and that's the facilities. And if I click here, I see another type of form control. It's also a pop-up form control, but this time it supports multiple selections. So I'm just gonna check the items that apply, and I click close. And now if I switch to the text mode, you can see all this structure that was automatically inserted by Oxygen without me knowing anything about the schema or the fact that some data goes into the attributes or anything. So this truly is an XML authoring for everyone. And even if I did knew the schema and how to edit an XML document, wasn't a lot faster to do this editing in the author mode than inserting each element by hand and composing all references as being relative to this file and so on. So let's switch back to the author mode. Oh, and also if I want to remove a point of interest, again, I can use an inline action, the remove action. I just click it, and the document it's updated. So it's very easy and very intuitive and very productive working with these form controls. So that was the travel guide. It's time to go to the next example, and this one, it's a form. And let me just close the travel guide. So for this part of my demonstration, I have selected an official US form. It's an application to replace a permanent resident card. And as you can see, it has a lot of form controls like, let's say, checkboxes and date pickers and combo boxes. And now let's see how easy it would be to edit similar kind of information, but this time structured into an XML document in Oxygen's author mode. So let me close this PDF. We'll return to Oxygen, and I'll open my XML file. So this little XML file contains similar form-oriented data. Let's switch to the author mode. And as you can see, it looks a lot similar, and it's just as easy to use. So we have checkboxes, we have combo boxes, we have date pickers, again some checkboxes, but this time I'm forced to select only one of those. So it's very easy to edit form-oriented information in Oxygen's author mode. Now we're done with the form, and the next example refers to personnel information. This too is a sample file that comes with Oxygen. So it contains all kind of information like the name of the person, its email address, subordinates, and manager links, and so on. And let me just switch to the author mode. And just look how different uh, the XML document can look if you use background images and form controls like combo boxes and inline actions, browsing capability, and so on. So there's a lot of flexibility being offered by these form controls together with other features from author like background images and so on. Okay, this was a quick example. So I have shown you different type of XML vocabularies, but how about globally used and accepted XML vocabulary like the data framework? So I'm going to show you how we've used these form controls to help a user edit some data documents. So I'll just open, I have here a simple data map. We'll open it in the editor area. And as you can see, it's quite a simple data map. It has a topic reference, a key definition, not much here to see, except for maybe this text field form control being used for the keys. But if I go on the toolbar, again on the styles button, I can change the CSS that is used to the one that uses form control. So I'll just click the edit attributes in place, and now I have a lot of form controls to help me edit this data map. So if I want to edit, for example, the topic ref, I can just browse for the topic. If I want to edit the nav title, I can just edit it right here in the content instead of going to the attributes panel. I can lock the title using a checkbox. If I want to make a key reference, I have a combo box that offers me the keys that are defined in my map. I also have combo boxes for the collection type and the format. For the platform conditional attributes, I have a content completion text field and so on. So it's a lot easier and faster to edit this type of information inside a data map. Now let's open the topic, this care topic. I'll just click here. Okay. So we also have form controls inside the data topic. For example, we can edit the created date and the revised date using date pickers. And we also have form controls for the profiling conditions in data, like this. We added some form controls for the column specification of a table. So let's say, for example, if I want to make the first column shorter, I can just use this text field form control and just change its value, and the table is automatically updated. So here is how we've used this form control support to enhance the editing experience for a data document. So this concludes my part of the user's perspective presentation, and now it's time for you to see Marcus's use cases of form controls. So George, if you could please
Yes, thank you, Alex. So let me give control to Marcus. Okay.
Yes, hello. Thanks, George and Alex, for inviting me to this webinar. Um, my name is Markus Wiedenmeier, and I'm a consultant in XML publishing technologies and processes, mainly in the area of technical communication. And my problem so far was that there was only always a gap between the technical point of view of XML and how a user wants to use it. And I think with this new feature in Oxygen 14.1, in-place forms, there is a big steps to bring these 2 points of view together. I've prepared a small sample from a current project, and this is a chapter where technical data should be written. And as we can see, one moment, as we can see here, this is, I have to put this away. Okay. This is a chapter structure with a head, and this head has some index markers or one index markers and structure for technical data, and each technical data is grouped by a data group with data title, value, and units. And with this small XML, I've got through 3 problems. One is the index marker, because the index marker for me is not a data which should be in the content. It's always data which are put in some attributes, and index markers we have primary and secondary level. And now at the moment, customer has to edit this attribute here to change the values, and he has always to go to the attributes dialog and switch from the normal content to this data. The other problems I have is to add some new group to this technical data structure. If I add a new data group, there's always inserted data title, because this is a non-optional element. All other elements like values and units are optional, and so in standard only the title is inserted, and I have to add it one by one to this structure. So this is what I want to make easier to the user. And the third one is all these data groups are handled by a variant filter, where an user has to add the validity of these data groups to the attribute. So he has to say, okay, data group doc, this content isn't valid for the manual or something else, and it has to switch to this attribute dialog and change the values here. So with 14.1, the in-place controls make a big step in a direction a user can edit this content directly where it works normally. So if I want to change the index marker, I change the CSS and get some in-place controls, text boxes, where I can change this index data directly here. And the other one is I want to give some more comfortability to the user to add some new technical data. So I can switch the CSS to a CSS which provides controls to add technical data. And I've got some list buttons to add technical data. If I use this at the bottom, it creates a new data group at the end of the structure, and if I put it somewhere in the content and press it, it puts it at the end of this control as a child of it. And so I can add this in a very simple manner. um, the third problem I had is to make it easy for the user to add values for which document type this content is valid. So I added in a further CSS some functionality to this form where I can press this pop-up selection box and define, okay, this data group is not valid for product information, and I have to check this. And if I check this, you see it on the right side, it's added some information to the doctype filter attribute, and I can add more than this. I can add the brochure, the catalog, and it's not valid for training. And you see all this information is set to this attribute automatically. So this one I put to the customer and shows this feature to him, and he was very excited about this. But he had one problem with that. If I click this, if I have to change these values, he said, all things I want to have gone away, I have to check. And I don't want to have to check this, I want to have to uncheck it. So I derived from the current pop-up selection box a new class in Java and changed this behavior in another way. So let's go to the results CSS, and that's what we see now. We have a positive assignment. That what I did now is I changed the behavior. I said I don't want to filter it. I want to say for which type of documents it is valid. So we see it is valid for COBA. It's a kind of manual and the product information for after sales, but it's not valid for the product document, product information, brochure, catalog, and training. So you see the values of the attributes are the same as before, but what the user sees is another thing. So if I want to disable temperatures in a brochure, I click it away now. I uncheck it, and you see now it's valid for the other 4 document types, but not for the brochure. And that's I think it's the way a user thinks. He thinks not in a negative but in a positive way. And if you have to write documentation for this, I think it's easier to write the documentation for this kind of feature in editing this XML content. So that I think was where the feature that I want to show you, and I hope it was clear what I'm doing here.
Yes, thank you, Marcus. It was very interesting, and thanks again for accepting our invitation to show your real use of this new functionality that we added indeed in version 14.1 and improved in version 14.2. Now some of the questions were how you can do this, right? So Alex will address exactly this next. So let me give control now to Alex to show what is behind this functionality.
Hello again. So now that we've concluded with the user's perspective, it's time to take a look under the hood and see how we can add these phone controls to any custom XML vocabulary. Adding phone controls, it's very easy. You just have to go to the associated CSS file, and I'll just use the travel guide samples. So I'll just open the travel guide CSS, And on the content property of CSS rule, you just have to use these oxygen extension functions, each one representing a form control. So if you want to have a text field form control, you'll have to use the oxy text field function. If you want to use a combo box, you'll use the oxy combo box function, and so on. So there are quite a few built-in form controls. We have text fields, checkboxes, a pop-up form control supporting both single and multiple selection. We have date picker, an URL chooser, and the inline actions, which in my opinion are the most interesting of them all. So let's focus on such a form control. Let's say the combo box. The signature of this function, of the oxy combo box of any form control function, its arguments are grouped into property name, property values pair, as you can see here. First, we have the edit property, which basically tells Oxygen what you are editing. You could be either editing an attributes value, for example, here I'm editing the currency attribute, or you could be editing the text content of an element, and then you would use this predefined value. Next, we have the editable property, which basically tells Oxygen if it should use an editable combo box, and the user can enter any custom value, or if the user should be forced to select an item from the combos pop-up. Now, the values presented by the combo box in its pop-up are normally taken from the schema. But if the schema doesn't offer this kind of information, or if you want to restrict it some more, then you can always specify these values right here in the CSS through the values property. And the value of this property is a comma separated enumeration. Next, we have the columns property, which enforces a fixed width for the form control, and it can be used to construct complex layouts using form controls, but I'll get back to this a bit later. Another interesting property for the combo box is the labels property, which associates a label with each item. So for example, I can say US currency and currency. Now I just save the CSS, and let me just open the XML file again. Reapply the form controls CSS, and now as you can see, the currency combo box presents me the labels that I've just entered. But as I select an entry, the actual value being committed is the dollar value, as you can see in the attributes panel. Now let's say I want to edit the phone element using a text field form control. How would I do that? Well, we go back to the CSS and we add a rule that matches the phone element. And on its content property, we'll use the oxy text field extension function, and we'll be editing the text content, so we'll use this predefined value. And let's also impose a fixed width for the text field, say 15. Again, we save the CSS, we go back to the XML, we are asked if we want to refresh, and yes we do. And now, as you can see, we have a form control that allows us to edit the phone. We have a text field that allows us to edit the phone element. You should also notice a bit of a redundancy. By default, the author mode also presents the content of the element right in the editing area. But if we use a form control to edit this text, normally we don't want it to be shown. So to get this behavior, we'll get back to the CSS, and This time we're going to use the visibility property and we'll bind it to this oxycollapse text value, which is also an oxygen extension value. We save, we go back to the XML, we acknowledge the refresh, and now our text field is the only way we can edit the phone element. I also want to emphasize a bit on the inline actions form control that you've seen in a bit earlier in action. And just again, if you are not familiar with the author mode in Oxygen, I have to give you a short introduction, a short description about the author actions. And to do that, I'll have to go into Options, Preferences, and on the Document Type Association, what we have here is sort of like a configuration associated with an XML vocabulary. So I have such a configuration created for the travel guide. And if we open this configuration and we go on the author tab, again on the actions tab, we can see these actions here. So an author action allows us to perform all kinds of operations inside the author mode. For example, this action over here inserts a new point of interest element. And these type of actions, you can add them in the contextual menu and or in the toolbar, and through them you can perform very complex and very specific document changes. And what this inline action form control actually does is that actions that, like I said, would normally only be available in the contextual menu or on the toolbar can be offered to the users right in the context where they are supposed to be used. So they are a lot easier to discover and to access. And if we take a look at the CSS, again we have an Oxygen extension function for this binding. We have the Oxy button function, which has an action ID property that binds this button to an author action. So that's why I said that in my opinion the inline actions are the most interesting of the form control. Now I've talked a little earlier about the columns property of form control. Now I want to get into details. For that, I'll open again the form XML, and as you can see, it has a table-like layout. We have one column for the labels, and we have another column for the form controls. Normally, if you want to render a table using CSS, you normally need 3 levels in your XML. So you need the table level, the row level, and the cell level. But if we take a look at my XML structure in the outline, we notice that I have only 2 levels. So it would be impossible for me to get this kind of layout using only CSS. And how was I able to create this layout? Let's open the associated CSS file. No, I don't need a project. I have used the columns property for my form controls, and I have here the Oxy label extension function, which is also something relative new in Oxygen. And this function allows me to associate styling information with a piece of static text. So for example, I said that this text should have a fixed width of 40%. And that's just how I created that table-like layout. So for example, if I want to make make it a little wider, I can say here 70%, and when I return to the XML, I notice that the date picker has been pushed to the right, because now the date of birth label it's a lot wider. Another interesting feature that we've added for this oxylabel function in the current developing Oxygen version, which is version 15 and should come shortly, it's the styles property. And in this styles property, I can write I can write directly CSS properties to be applied to this label. So for example, I can, if I want this label to be bold, I can say font weight and it's bold. Now I save the CSS, back to the XML, and you notice that the label is now bold. And even more, another interesting use case is that I can use import directives here, CSS import directives. If we take a look at this label CSS file that I want to use, we see that it uses a red color, and also the font is bold. So I have added here an import directive, and if I go into the XML again, I see that the date of birth label is both bold and red. So this is an interesting way through which you can reuse CSS properties for different Oxygen, for different labels. And when you want to modify these labels, you just go into one place and you make a change, and all the labels will be updated. So that was the columns property, and how together with the oxylabel function can be used to construct complex layouts in Oxygen. Let's go back to my slides. So as you've seen, there are quite a few built-in form controls, but if these are not enough for you, you can always create your own custom form controls. And actually that is something that Marcus already did, and he showed you in its presentation, the pop-up form control, the customized pop-up form control. And to create a custom form control, you'll have to use the Oxygen SDK API, which is a Java-based API, and it's available for download on our website at this link location. And you'll have to implement two interfaces, the in-place renderer and the in-place editor interfaces. So as you've noticed, it's an renderer slash editor architecture, very similar to a, let's say, a Java tree or a Java table. And the reason for this is that, as I've shown you in the travel guide example, let me open it again. A form control can look one way, let's say a label, but when an editing session is requested, it can use something else, like a list. Of course, if your form control it's more like a text field, it looks and it edits in the same way, then you'll probably have the same class implementing both interfaces. We also have a sample form control available in the SDK, and it's called a simple URL chooser editor. And we also plan to make available in the SDK the source code for all of our built-in form controls, so that you can inspire yourself from it, or perhaps extend them as Marcus did. Now, assuming you've already implemented these interfaces and you've created the phone control, the next step would be to bind this newly created phone control in the document. And to do that, you have to go to the CSS again, and on the content property, you have to use this OxyEditor function. And let's look at the properties of this function. First, we have the renderer class name, which is the name of your class name that implemented the in-place renderer interface, and it will be used by Oxygen when it needs to render that phone control. The next one, the swing editor class name, again your class that implements the in-place editor interface this time. And Oxygen will delegate to this class whenever an editing session is requested. Basically, this class will have to give an Java AVT component for the editing. The next, the next property. Now you'll only need this property if you intend your phone control to be available in Oxygen's Eclipse plugin, this SVT editor class name. And this class name also has to implement the in-place editor interface, but this time will be asked for an SVT control to handle the editing session. Next, you have the edit property that you already know, and if your phone control actually finishes by updating an attribute value or the text content of an element, then you can always let Oxygen do the document update by binding the edit property to either the attribute name or the text predefined value. But if your phone control wants to perform more complex structural changes in the document, then what it has to do is it must bind the edit property to this custom predefined value. And what will happen is that Oxygen will restrain from trying to update the document, and the phone control will be left with this task of updating the document. Next to these properties, this OxyEditor function can receive any number of property name, property values pairs, and these properties will be passed to the phone control, and it can perform differently based on their values. Like, for example, our combo box has that editable property that I've shown you. I should also mention that your Java class that implemented these interfaces has to be packed inside a jar archive, and you have to specify that jar archive. Again, we'll go to the document type association, the travel guide, the configuration for my type of XML documents, and here we have a class path tab, and you have to put your jar archive here. As an alternative, there's also a class path property on the OxyEditor function, but I forgot to put it in my slides, but you'll find it in the documentation nevertheless. So that's how you bind on custom phone control from the CSS. Now, a different approach is to bind it directly from the SDK, and this is not only an alternative, but it's also the solution for special cases. For example, in cases in which you have dynamic values that cannot be known or computed at the CSS level. And for example, that's exactly how we do it. If I'll just open the data topic again, and that's exactly how we do it with the data profiling conditions. So this form control over here is actually added using using the SDK, because all these values are dynamic and we don't know them in the CSS. So if that's your use case, you'll have to extend the styles filter class from the SDK, and on the filter method you'll have to contribute this style element with links to your custom phone control. So this is another use case. So this concludes the developer perspective. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions that you didn't already ask, please do. Thank you again.
Thank you, Alex. We received a few questions, and I will go through them. Just one moment. You can also ask additional questions now. So some questions were about would the recording of today's session be made available for viewing later? If yes, how and where? In about 2 days, we plan to make the recording available. You receive a follow-up email with a direct link to that recording, but this will be made available also on our events program page, where we have also the other webinars that were already recorded and made available there. Now, another question, can the values of the Oxy combo box only be taken from a schema or also from a DTD? The answer for this is that Oxygen supports XML schema, DTD, RelaxNG, and VDL, and any of these can provide the values that will be available in the combo box. And also you can specify values in the CSS. And as Alex mentioned, if you implement a styles filter, you can also implement a logic to get those values from an external database or an external source, basically, and just generate the CSS, the Oxy combo box with those values dynamically using a styles filter. Another question was, can you build some of these forms into published output that an end user would use? And the answer is that the CSS is used to style directly the XML document, and it is used by the Oxygen author mode, while the output is generated is a different format and contains different elements, so that cannot use the same CSS. But it is possible, of course, if you write the transformation to create an output containing also forms. One other question is that Oxygen provides also an outer component that can be used as a web as an applet on the web. Is this functionality available also there? The answer is yes. The same functionality is available also in the Oxygen outer component that can be used to provide editing in the browser. Let me see if we have. Do you have similar tools for HTML5? It's another question. The support for XHTML5 editing, the default support in Oxygen was not updated, I think, to take advantage of this forms control. As Alex presented earlier, we made these additions to data, I think also to DOBook, but this is work in progress. Basically, we will try to extend our supported default frameworks to take advantage of this functionality as much as we can. Another question, can you bind specific CSS to an XPath expression, or you always have to bind it to an element or attribute name? Basically, Oxygen uses CSS rules, so any selector, any CSS selector can be used to match some parts of the document. But the CSS selectors are different from XPath extensions. What we have is an CSS extension called Oxy XPath that allow to evaluate XPath expression, but that's on the other side. Basically, it's not on the selector part, it's on the CSS content. But you can intercept also through the styles filter extension. You can intercept the context, and you can decide what styles how you change the styles. Basically, the styles filter receives the styles Oxygen is about to use to render a specific element, and you can decide if you want to modify them in based on your logic that you implement in that styles filter. Do you have the same type of simple functionality for modifying the CSS styles? Oxygen provides a CSS editor, but that is not a visual editor. There is a request for improvement logged on our issue tracking system to provide a visual interface for CSS editing, but we didn't get yet to that improvement request. Another question: when dealing with data, define a bunch of concref in the map. Is that possible to use the CSS to make it look like the form you did in the travel guide? I guess you can write, you know, a CSS rule to match this and present the concref information in a form control. Alex already showed that the current data map CSS that shows the styles, I think that already presents the concref information in the we have to check, but you can extend our standard data CSS files to add your additional rules, and you can add that as an alternate CSS style sheet. You also seen that in Marcus examples when he added many CSS alternate CSS style sheets, so you can switch between them. Maybe it will be a good idea to for Alex to show where exactly the SDK is on our website, to show exactly where people can get the SDK from.
So this is the location on our website where you can get the SDK.
Another question is, does the hierarchy of the author presentation have to follow the hierarchy of the XML structure? So you could, for example, present the last element in the document first in the author presentation. The CSS does not provide this reverse order, so the view in the author will have to follow the XML structure. The last question, I think, was, is there something special to do in the configuration to activate the styles drop down from the travel guide? The styles drop down is activated automatically if there are available multiple alternate CSS style sheets. So you can choose from them. You can define alternate CSS style sheets either in the document or the framework configuration.
So this is how I define my, how I associate in my style sheet. So I have two CSS and I have a title for each one, and I say which one it's the alternate and so on. And you can also perform this configuration from the document type association.
So if your question was not answered somehow, then we will follow up anyway by email because we have all your questions, and we will answer after the webinar by email. We already have 2 other upcoming webinars. We will come back to development with XSLT development with Oxygen. XSLT is a big area, and this will be part 1. And then we will have a webinar on data support in Oxygen. Again, it will be just a part of that because we plan to have 2 parts for data support in Oxygen. One covering the, let's say, data 1.1 level, and then the second part covering the more advanced functionality in data 1.2. We'll be attending a number of conferences. Next week we'll be in US in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, for the Data CMS Data North America conference. We have a stand there, and we have also a session showing how possibilities to use data style guide to help the user learn and understand data while he creates data content. We will be also at User Assistance Europe in June, XML London, Information Energy. All these are grouped around the same date. And later on in June, we will attend Congility in Gatwick, London. This concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to meet you either at one of our upcoming webinars or meet you in person at one of these conferences. Thank you again. Goodbye.